Welcome to the Sixth Wheels Consulting Podcast, dialoguing disability and discussing difference, inclusion, and all abilities in today's world. Now here are your hosts, Matthew Shapiro and Bob Nolly.
In the heat of it all, you have found your way back to us. This is the Six Wheels Consulting Podcast. Oh my gosh, my good friend Matthew Shapiro. Matthew, how are you?
I'm great, Bob. How are you? I'm so excited to be back for another episode, sir.
It's great. It's great. And thanks to everybody that's listening for all you've done to support us. Here's the ticket. I want you to go to Apple Podcast, iTunes, and hit that subscribe button. That's a big deal. Because when we finish up, we were just talking about this, when we finish up a show at the end of every evening, it's quiet. There's no people cheering madly. There's no people throwing tomatoes. There's nothing. It's just the quiet. We're in our own heads. And so we don't know yet. But then all of a sudden it happens. Let me tell you, we were so excited when we got a couple of dozen people to listen. Guess what? We have hundreds now.
Yes.
We have hundreds.
We are in the hundreds of listeners now, Bob.
And thank you so much. So if you haven't done so yet, please go to iTunes, Apple Podcasts. Please hit the subscribe button. That's a big deal for us.
And I would also, sorry to interrupt, Bob, but I would also say they can also find us on SoundCloud as well. So go, if iTunes doesn't work for you, go on SoundCloud, because that's another alternative way for you to listen to this great podcast that we've made.
But find a way once to get to iTunes, because I want you to be able to leave us that nice 5-star review if you can. And,
sure.
And leave us a comment there, and we'll show you some love here. Like Luke Tacoma. Luke Tacoma writes, podcast awesome. Darn tootin', Luke. This is totally awesome, very enlightening and interesting, especially traveling abroad with the disability episodes. They're all going to be disability episodes, Luke, but thanks. Well, here's the big deal. Nice job, Matthew. There you go.
Yes.
Take a bow. Very good.
Yes, I'm taking a bow right now.
There it is, just like that.
That's
different than taking a vow.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
Exactly.
So, you and I have had busy weeks so far, and it's still early in the week for us. So what have you been working on? What's going on in your world?
The thing I always say, Bob, is what am I not working on at this point? But I got some exciting news today. I heard from my high school, the current principal at the high school at which I graduated from in Virginia. Has asked me to speak at their upcoming convocation.
Wow!
10 minutes. So I'm excited to be able to go back to my old stomping grounds and see what's changed. I haven't been back in almost 10 years. My 10-year reunion will be in 2019. So I haven't been back in a while, but I'm excited for that opportunity as well.
You've just been called to the principal's office. I mean, did you ever get called to the principal's office before while you were there?
I was an angel in school, Bob. What are you talking about?
Me too. You know, I have friends that just can't believe that. But yes. That's just excellent. Where did you go to high school?
I went to a school in Virginia called J.R. Tucker High School.
You went to Tucker?
I did.
Matthew.
Yes. Yes, sir.
What did your mom say about that? Because she and I both went to your arch rival high school.
Yes, one of our arch rivals. Yes, I believe you were a Freeman Rebel, weren't you?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, the Tucker game was always, that was like Dallas and Washington. That was like Tech in Virginia. Was. I
can tell you, it's probably not like that now. But
no, it's not. It's not.
I'm sure
things change. We better be ready for them. Well, yeah. I'm sorry. In all seriousness, congratulations on that, because that's a big deal.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited to get back to my old stomping grounds. They've asked me to talk for about 10 minutes, and I'm just excited to be able to share some thoughts with the senior class. I guess it would be the class of 2019, 2020. Yeah, I guess it would be the class of 2019. I
would like to take credit for that sound effect, because that was so perfect when you were talking about this. Yes. That's right.
Yes. That was one of my many alerts. I'm sorry to listeners, but
congratulations. Yeah. Make sure you take a recorder and have it with you, because we want to share it with people that aren't there.
Yeah, no, well, I'll definitely be taking a lot of pictures and getting some pictures. So I would encourage everyone to be on the lookout on our Six Wheels social media pages, and got a lot of exciting things in the works that we're working on. In addition to that, we've got 6 speeches coming up, and including or not including that one that I just mentioned.
Speeches are a lot of work. It is
are.
not sitting there doing the writing.
No,
for me personally, but it's
Sure.
it's the delivery. It's the delivery of getting there, because it's a performance.
Sure. No, it's definitely a performance art. And I've often said I'm most comfortable on a stage, but there's 2 hard parts about it, right? There's the one where I've got to create the content and create the slide deck and make it look all pretty and presentable so that people, not only like what I'm saying, but they have great visuals to look at too. But then also I have to, have a plan of attack for how I'm going to go about the given talk. And the other piece to that too is you want to do it in a way that you don't necessarily sound robotic. You want it to come across as natural as possible. So that, that takes some practice and some skill and some work on my end, and that's part of my gig, and that's part of why I like it. So, very busy on that front. Got some other plans and things that I want to do in order to grow this wonderful podcast that we're creating, and just love the work that I'm doing right now. It's starting to really, really, really take off.
All right, tell us about the book again then.
Yeah, so I've mentioned it a couple times on the podcast previously, but I do have I'm also a published author in addition to all of the other amazing work that I do. The book is called Infinite Inspirations. It is a book where 13 other authors each wrote and kind of a chapter, so to speak. And so I have a chapter in the book, and shockingly enough, my mom also has a chapter in the book, or not shockingly, that's a terrible way to talk about my mom like that. She's a great writer too, but she also has a chapter in the book, and just trying to, want to get those messages out to people, and would love to be able to share those books with people. And so they can find them at my speaking website, which is Matthew, Matthew Shapiro, Shapiro, speaking, speaking.com. So MatthewShapiroSpeaking.com. And there's a shop on that website, and you should be able to find the Infinite Inspirations book in the shop. I think right now we're selling them for about $20. So it's a really quick and easy investment, and you'll get some good information from the book. So,
and it's a good read too. So
yes.
Reach out for that. And yes. If they come to the sixwheelsconsulting.com website, I'm sure you have a link there that they can.
Yes, there's a link to my speaking site. We're still working on getting a shop built on the Six Wheel site, but there is a link to my speaking site on that website as well. So you can find it that way. But the most direct way to get it is to go to the MatthewShapiroSpeaking.com website that I mentioned. But we're also trying to build some of that out onto the Six Wheels website too, so that there's opportunities there.
Okay. Draw a breath here. Let me do the lifting for a little bit. I found this article today. A very nice lady who I've never met, but she seems nice. Heather Jones guested this piece into the Huffington Post.
Gotta love the HuffPo.
The headline, which she wouldn't write the headline, an editor would write the headline, says, "I'm not bound to a wheelchair. I was freed by one." And here's her story. What do you think? And I'm going to loop back to you with this question. So while you're sitting here, what do you think when you hear the phrase "confined to a wheelchair"? Do you feel pity? Do you feel a focus on the loss of mobility? To her, the words conjured an image of fragility and weakness, and they create a sense of being trapped, of being held back, confined. The word itself means restricted, limited, cramped, inadequate. Wheelchair bound isn't any better, she writes. It has all the connotations as confined to a wheelchair, while also managing to sound like a very specific BDSM preference. She has a sense of humor. Being bound to a wheelchair sounds simultaneously horrific and titillating. But neither of those phrases portrays the accurate experience of a wheelchair user despite their common usage. The truth is, mobility devices are neither confining nor binding. They are freeing. She had always been active. You wouldn't know to look at her, she says. She self-characterizes herself as having a fat body, coffee in hand, always on the move. At least she was always on the move. She didn't have a driver's license, had 2 small children, and a propensity for cabin fever used to necessitate her heading out to take a walk. So a typical day for her involved dropping her oldest child at school, then wandering around the city with the younger one in a stroller, enjoying the fresh air and caffeination along the way, and until it was time to go back and pick up the oldest one at school. She was, said she was a nomad. Then when she turned 36, her hours of casual strolling whenever she might want to vanished. She couldn't stand for a shower. She couldn't cook dinner without a chair. Take her children to the park became an impossibility. She missed all their extracurricular things, all their school open houses. And when you're a parent, that's just crushing. So the nomad all of a sudden is immobile. For 2 years, she is housebound. She had developed 4 spinal conditions, 1 per vertebrae in the lower back. And this indicated intense pain, not in her head, but it was not due to her weight. But that alleviated fears that she brought this on herself, but she couldn't find any relief. Surgeons refused to see her, citing each condition as being minor, not easily treatable, and she started a retreat. She grappled with reality. She couldn't walk or stand for more than minutes at a time, and she was never going to get better. She stayed in bed most of the day, reserving her small bit of walking, moving around to and from the chair in the living room. Here she writes, she felt limited, confined, bound. So her worldview would get shifted again with a trip to the hospital for an MRI. The test itself wouldn't be helpful, but the trip changed everything. Murphy's Law was being adhered to faithfully in the family. They parked at the opposite end of the building from the imaging department. So you go, oh, here, we're right by the door, but actually the door you need to be to is an acre away on the other side. She took a deep breath, put on a stiff upper lip, and prepared to inch her way through all the hallways and getting lost, just as I've done many times. 10 feet through the door, her husband turned to her, totally exasperated with the whole thing, and said, "This is ridiculous. Just get in and I'll push you." And he looked at a wheelchair station right there, and she goes, "No, I'll walk. Wheelchairs are for handicapped people." I wasn't handicapped. I just couldn't walk. I'll leave those for those frail, weak people who needed them. 20 steps further, she didn't make it. Fell by the pain. She collapsed into a wheelchair, and she said she'd allow herself to use this chair in this hospital. I wasn't bound to it after all. And the ride was just a changer for her. She decided she would never be confined again. Her disability was what confined her. The wheelchair had freed her. And it goes on with more details, and perhaps we can link it up on the webpage or somewhere. It is by Heather Jones in the HuffPost personal session. So, Matthew, when, I can't hear you ever using that phrase, confined to a wheelchair.
Well, that would be correct, Bob. It's something that we've talked about a little bit on the podcast, and I think, first of all, thank you for that great synopsis and read of that article. And two things come to mind when you sent me that article and you told me about that article, and two things immediately came to my mind. One is the language that we use is so important, and by no means am I bound to my wheelchair in any way, shape, fashion, or form. I'm fortunate enough to be able to leave my wheelchair anytime that I want, and so I'm not bound to anything. And I think the language that we use is, when we're discussing disability, is something that we need to work on as a society. And I'll talk about that in more detail in just a second. The other piece to that I really, so I saw a negative side to the article and I saw a positive side to the article. And the positive side was somebody embracing their need for the use of a mobility device, right? So often we have people who, and particularly able-bodied people who might become injured or become older or need some assistance, as did this young lady that you mentioned in the article. But her willingness to embrace the need for a mobility device and sort of shift her mindset from being, oh, I don't need that because I am not disabled, to sort of fully embracing the need for using a mobility device and giving her that level of freedom back that she was unable to have because she couldn't stand for long periods of time or she couldn't walk for long periods of time. I think that's very powerful, and I think that is a piece to this article that we need to talk about. It is okay to use a mobility device if one needs one. There's nothing to be ashamed about in requesting the need for a mobility device. And for those that don't know, a mobility device could be it's anything from a walker to a wheelchair to one of those little leg scooter things if you break your leg, a cane, anything that can help one with mobility challenges. And so the fact that this young lady was willing to embrace the use of a mobility device, it doesn't make her any weaker. It doesn't make her anything to be ashamed about, right? For her to embrace that is a very, very powerful piece. So I take that angle to the article as a very, very big positive. Now, the other side to that and the flip side to that is, and this is what I immediately thought of, the first thing I saw from this article was the headline, where it said, I am bound to my wheelchair, and I was I'm not bound to my wheelchair. As a matter of fact, it freed me from the challenge that I was facing. The language that we use to describe people with disabilities is something that I think we need to vastly, vastly, vastly improve upon as a society. We use colorful language like bound to a wheelchair or, crippled.
Yeah, we think that's polite too.
Sure.
Bound to a wheelchair. I think, we write that, we think we're being not cute. We're thinking we're trying to elicit the emotion we want to elicit.
Sure.
By sharing that thought, whatever. And it's not the best way.
Right. Or I get oftentimes, from in the most unique or most unexpected places, you get from doctors that I'm bound to a wheelchair or wheelchair bound, or from news media, where they're using, in my opinion, the wrong way to describe people with disabilities, or they say the autistic or the crippled or the deaf, or just improper language. And for those that don't know, there's actually a sort of a special way that a lot of the disability community prefers to be talked about, and that's known as person first language.
Person first.
Yes. Okay. Yes. And so person first language puts the person before the disability in the descriptor. So I'm a person who uses a wheelchair. I am not wheelchair bound, right? So like the person is represented before the disability is even brought up. So I'm a person who has autism, or I'm a person who has a visual impairment. The person is represented first before the disability is represented. Do you see the difference in the two ways we've talked about it? So we've said, a person who uses a wheelchair versus somebody who is wheelchair bound, or it's a very person-centered way of speaking about people with disabilities, and I think it adds a level of dignity and respect to people who have disabilities. Now, there's an interesting debate, even within the disability community. I would say my generation probably, let me say this, I prefer person-first language. I don't want to say my generation prefers it. I don't want to broad scope everybody. But there are a lot of people in the community that use person-first language. There are a lot of people also in the community that don't like person-first language. So there's even a struggle between the disability community in the appropriate way that we talk about ourselves. To me, part of that is driven from generational characteristics. The older generation takes pride in, considering themselves sort of crippled in it. They're not using it in the negative context that we've often heard it. They're kind of using it as, I guess a badge of courage, so to speak. Whereas my generation, we want to see the best in all people. And so I think that's where person-first language sort of derives from. I just have always found it very interesting that there's that struggle internally amongst the disability population.
Yeah, that is interesting that exists there. And, we're kind of circling around. It's the same kind of conversation we talked about in episode 1 where, I can sometimes feel uncertain, which is my own crime, when I come to you and go, do you need some help?
Sure.
I'm like, am I saying the wrong thing? And not having any idea if I'm saying the right thing or not.
So I think that brings about two pieces to it, right? You don't want to be offensive in using the wrong language. But then on the flip side of that, right? Like if I were to, one of the things that I try to do within my work and we're trying to do within this podcast is to educate people. And so if so say you and I are interacting and you say the wrong thing. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Say you and I are interacting and you, you might say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. To me, that is a perfect opportunity to educate you on the different way to go about doing it. So, don't use that for you, I can see why you would be nervous, but I also, on my end, don't think I should be nervous to try and correct that situation. And I'm not saying that I'm not correcting to be snotty or negative or call you out for necessarily doing something wrong. But what I am trying to do is educate you so that, the next time that interaction happens or the next time you want to use, say wheelchair bound, you would say instead person who uses a wheelchair or person who is visually impaired or person who has autism or is on the autism spectrum.
That's perfect. That frames it up so nicely.
Yeah, so that you can have an experience to say, I'm going to use person-first language and I'm going to give people the dignity back. I'm going to give people with disabilities their dignity back in the way that I use language, in the way that I describe them when I'm talking about them.
Tonight, I'm going to let Heather Jones have the last word. And I wish I could push the little button on the tape machine and hear her voice, and maybe one day we will. But here's what she says. It's time to change the script we use surrounding mobility devices. The attitude meaning she, formed toward wheelchairs and walkers based on her perception of them was, I was able-bodied, held me back for 2 years. Having been conditioned to see mobility devices as a last resort, something you used when you no longer had a choice, robbed herself of years that she could have been out living life to the fullest.
And I think, and I know you wanted to give her the last word, but I just want to reiterate, I think that's really important, right? To take ownership not only in having pride and being okay in using mobility devices, but then also being okay in using the right type of language to describe people with disabilities. And so, I just want to hit that point home one more time, and I want people to think about that. from listening to this great episode.
And I stand corrected. We'll let that be the last word.
Sure.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to pay the piper. If you enjoyed this show or any other show you've listened to, go to tonight. Here's the price you pay. Tonight, go to the Facebook page for Six Wheels Consulting and like that page. Go out there and put a comment on there about the show and let Matthew know that you're out there listening. And that would mean a lot to everyone.
Absolutely. And I would also suggest for people to give us ideas and topics for other things that they want us to cover on the podcast.
And they will. And when they come, they will. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to episode 11 of the Six Wheels Consulting Podcast. This has been Matthew Shapiro with myself, Bob Nolly. Think inclusion and keep rolling.
Thank you, everybody.